Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why the very people who seem so powerful, so in control, and so confident on the surface, narcissists, are often the ones who are most unsettled by you? They walk into rooms demanding attention, controlling conversations, and trying to dictate how others should feel, yet beneath that carefully crafted mask lies a deep and unspoken fear. The truth is, what they fear most is not your weakness, but your strength. It's not your silence, but your voice. It's not your approval, but your ability to see through them. Narcissists thrive on control, on keeping you second-guessing yourself, on convincing you that their version of reality is the only one that matters. But the moment you begin to trust your own perspective, the moment you stand tall in your truth without seeking their validation, the balance shifts. They fear the day you stop playing their game, because when you do, the illusion of their power begins to crumble. They fear you when you no longer take the bait, when you respond with calm instead of chaos, when you set boundaries that cannot be broken. What unsettles them is not your aggression, but your clarity, not your dependence, but your independence. The greatest threat to a narcissist is the person who sees them for who they truly are and refuses to be diminished. Narcissists fear losing control over others because, at their very core, control is the lifeline that sustains them. It is not about power in the traditional sense, but about ensuring that the world bends to their will, that people respond to them in the ways they demand, and that reality itself can be manipulated to suit their fragile sense of self. When a narcissist interacts with you, every word, every gesture, every carefully constructed silence is designed to pull you into their orbit and keep you spinning there. To them, control is oxygen, and the thought of losing it is like suffocating. Without it, they are forced to confront truths they cannot bear to face, that they are not as strong, admired, or invincible as they want you to believe. This need for control is not just about grand gestures or overt domination. It plays out in subtle ways that chip away at a person's confidence. A narcissist might control by guilt, making you feel responsible for their moods. They might control by gaslighting, convincing you that what you saw or felt was not real, planting seeds of doubt so that you lean on their version of events instead of your own. They might control through charm, drawing you in with affection or praise, only to withdraw it at the exact moment you start feeling safe, ensuring you stay hooked on trying to win it back. Every tactic they use, whether cruel or sweet, has one goal: to keep you orbiting around them, never fully free to think, act, or feel without their influence. But the fear creeps in when that control begins to slip, when you start noticing the patterns, when you no longer bite the hook of their manipulations, when you stop explaining yourself over and over just to be heard. Something inside them panics. They thrive on the idea that they can predict and dictate your responses. The moment you interrupt that pattern, you become unpredictable to them, and unpredictability is what terrifies them most. It means their grip is loosening. It means their strategies are failing. And to a narcissist, failure in controlling others feels like an existential threat. Imagine a puppet master suddenly realizing the strings aren't attached anymore. That's the reality a narcissist faces when someone they try to dominate stops playing along. Without control, they lose their ability to shape the story, to position themselves as the victim, the hero, or the authority, depending on what benefits them most. Without control, they are left exposed because their entire identity relies on constructing narratives that keep them superior and you uncertain. When you no longer participate in those narratives, they are left without the script that props up their fragile ego. The fear of losing control is also rooted in the narcissist's deep insecurity. Beneath the grandiosity lies an emptiness they are desperate to avoid. Control over others distracts them from facing that void. If they can keep you questioning yourself, apologizing unnecessarily, or doubting your instincts, they feel a temporary sense of safety. But when you take back control of your own mind, when you trust your instincts and no longer bow to their distortions, they are forced closer to that inner emptiness. And nothing terrifies them more than being left alone with themselves without someone else to mold, blame, or dominate. Another reason losing control frightens them is because it strips away the illusion of power they present to the world. Narcissists are invested in maintaining an image: the successful leader, the devoted partner, the perfect parent, the magnetic friend. Control over others helps them protect that image. If you stop cooperating, if you stop covering for them or playing your assigned role in their performance, their facade begins to crack. They fear you because you have the power to expose what they work so hard to hide. It doesn't even require you to call them out loudly. Your quiet refusal to be manipulated is enough to destabilize them, because it signals that their image is not as unshakable as they want it to appear. They also fear losing control because it means they are no longer the center of your world. Narcissists feed on attention, whether it is praise or even conflict. As long as you are reacting, angry, hurt, confused, desperate, they feel significant. Your energy fuels them. But when you withdraw that energy, when you become neutral, calm, and detached, they feel erased. To them, that erasure is intolerable. They equate it with annihilation because without someone else's focus on them, they struggle to feel like they exist in any meaningful way. Losing control of you means losing a source of validation, And that loss threatens their very sense of self. You might notice how intensely they react when they sense that control slipping. They may double down with more manipulation, unleashing rage, tears, or elaborate stories to pull you back in. They may smear you to others, trying to control how people perceive you when they realize they can no longer control you directly. They may oscillate between love, bombing, and cruelty, desperate to find the lever that will still work. All of these reactions are symptoms of their fear because nothing unsettles them more than realizing the old tricks no longer hold power. In truth, the fear narcissists have of losing control is not about you specifically. It is about what you represent. You represent freedom, independence, and the ability to see clearly without being bound by their distortions. You represent proof that their tactics are not infallible. You represent the terrifying possibility that others might also see through them. By refusing to be controlled, you hold up a mirror to their fragility, and that reflection is something they spend their entire lives trying to avoid. Narcissists fear being truly seen for who they are because their entire existence depends on maintaining a carefully curated mask. To the outside world, they project charm, confidence, authority, or even vulnerability. When it serves them, they craft identities designed to win admiration, evoke sympathy, or command obedience. But underneath those layers lies a fragile, insecure self that they are desperate to conceal. Being seen means that someone has looked past the mask, past the performance, and caught a glimpse of the emptiness and fear they spend their lives running from. To a narcissist, that kind of exposure is terrifying because it threatens to undo the illusion that keeps them afloat. When you truly see a narcissist, you begin to notice the inconsistencies in their stories. You see how they shift personas depending on who is in the room, how they exaggerate achievements to cover their insecurities, how they play the victim to avoid responsibility. You notice the cracks in the facade, the moments where their mask slips and the grandiosity fades into defensiveness, irritation, or cold withdrawal. To most people, these small cracks might seem insignificant, but to the narcissist, they are a danger signal. They know that once someone begins noticing those cracks, the entire false image they've built is at risk of collapsing. And since that image is the only thing separating them from their own internal chaos, they will do everything in their power to keep you from seeing too much. This is why they rely so heavily on distraction and manipulation. If you get too close to the truth, they may suddenly charm you, shower you with praise, or try to overwhelm you with gifts and attention. If that doesn't work, they may turn to criticism, rage, or gaslighting to throw you off balance. Their goal is to keep your focus anywhere but on what is really happening beneath the surface. Because the moment you see them clearly, the moment you stop being hypnotized by the mask, you strip away the very tool they use to survive in relationships. That is what they fear most, that your clarity will reveal their emptiness. Being seen also threatens their relationships with others, which are often built on a false narrative. Narcissists want to control how people perceive them. They present themselves as the selfless parent, the generous friend, the misunderstood partner, the brilliant leader. They depend on others buying into these roles to sustain their self-image. When you see through them, you hold knowledge that contradicts the story they want everyone else to believe. Even if you never expose them publicly, the mere fact that you carry that awareness makes them deeply uneasy. It means they are no longer safe in their performance. It means they have been caught, and that knowledge alone is enough to spark their fear. Part of why being truly seen terrifies them is because it forces them into vulnerability. Vulnerability is something they avoid at all costs, not because they lack emotions, but because emotions feel dangerous to them. To acknowledge insecurity, shame, or fear would mean admitting they are not as powerful as they pretend to be. It would mean letting someone into the very space they are most desperate to hide. Vulnerability requires authenticity, and authenticity requires dismantling the false self they've built. That false self has become their armor, their survival mechanism. To be seen without it feels like standing defenseless in front of an enemy. So instead, they fight to keep the armor intact, even if it costs them genuine connection. The irony is that many people long to be seen and understood, but for narcissists, being seen is their greatest terror. They want to be admired, but only on their terms. They want to be recognized, but only for the image they've crafted. They want to receive validation, but only if it reinforces the narrative they've built around themselves. When someone sees past that and recognizes the manipulation, the insecurity, the fragility, they feel exposed, humiliated, and stripped of the one thing they depend on: control of the story. That fear often shows up in subtle ways. You might notice how quickly a narcissist changes the subject when you ask a probing question. You might notice how defensive they become when you point out contradictions in their behavior. You might notice how they suddenly withdraw or lash out when they sense that you've caught on to one of their tactics. These are not random reactions. They are fear responses. They know you are getting closer to the truth. And the closer you get, the harder they work to shut it down. What they dread most is not just that you will see them, but that you will stop responding to the mask. The mask works as long as people believe it. When you stop believing it, when you look past the performance and recognize the manipulation, it loses its power. A narcissist cannot tolerate that loss because it forces them to confront what they've been avoiding, that the mask is not real, and without it, they have nothing solid to stand on. This is why they sometimes accuse others of being too critical or too judgmental. It's not that you are overly harsh, it's that you are perceptive. They experience your clarity as an attack because it threatens the illusion. And because the illusion is all they have, they will react with intensity to preserve it. That intensity is rooted in fear, the fear that someone has truly seen them, and that once seen, they cannot be unseen. Narcissists fear your independence and self-sufficiency because it means they no longer hold the power to define your worth or dictate your choices. Their entire dynamic with others depends on creating dependency, whether emotional, financial, or psychological. They thrive when you need them, when you rely on them for approval, for direction, for a sense of identity, when you step into your independence, when you begin to live in a way that is not centered around their approval or their rules. They lose the leverage that keeps you bound to them. Independence threatens the very foundation of how they control relationships, because without dependency, their influence weakens and their presence becomes unnecessary. Self-sufficiency means you can validate yourself without their approval. It means you no longer crave their praise or fear their disapproval in the same way you once did. For a narcissist, this is dangerous because your independence disrupts the cycle of reinforcement they rely on. They need you to look up to them, to seek their validation, to chase their ever-shifting standards. When you stop doing that, when you decide that your voice matters more than their opinion, they are faced with the terrifying reality that their role in your life is shrinking. They are no longer the sun around which you orbit. You begin to build your own universe, and they cannot tolerate being anything less than central. Independence also means you have the freedom to walk away. A narcissist's greatest weapon is the unspoken belief they instill in you that you cannot live without them. They want you to believe that your happiness, stability, and sense of purpose are tied to their presence, even though they are the ones causing chaos. When you become self-sufficient, you prove that belief false. You show that you can survive, even thrive, without them, and that realization is unbearable to them. It exposes their illusion of indispensability. They fear that once you taste freedom, you will never return to the dependency that once fed their ego. This fear becomes especially evident when you start making choices that prioritize your own well-being, even in small ways. The moment you set a boundary, pursue your own goals, or refuse to be guilted into compliance, they sense the shift. They see your independence as rebellion, not because you are being unreasonable, but because it means they no longer control the narrative of your life. A simple act of self-care, a decision to trust your instincts, or a refusal to engage in their drama can feel like a personal attack to them because it signals that their grip is loosening. Their fear grows not from what you do, but from what it represents, proof that you are reclaiming yourself. Financial independence is another area that terrifies them. Money is often used as a tool of control. They may guilt you into dependence by reminding you of what they provide, or they may restrict resources to keep you limited in your options. When you gain financial autonomy, their leverage crumbles. They cannot threaten you with abandonment, nor can they use provision as a bargaining chip. The thought of you being able to stand on your own 2 feet, free from reliance on them, strips away a layer of power they hold dear. To them, financial freedom is not just about money. It symbolizes your ability to leave, to choose, to live without their permission. Emotional independence is equally threatening. Narcissists feed off your emotional reactions. They want you to cry, to yell, to plead, to constantly seek their reassurance. Every reaction confirms that they are significant in your inner world. When you become emotionally independent, when their insults no longer shatter you and their approval no longer defines you, they feel invisible. They cannot stand the idea that you could feel whole without them. Emotional detachment is like a mirror reflecting back their irrelevance, and that irrelevance terrifies them more than anger ever could. Your independence also means you have perspective. When you are no longer entangled in their manipulations, you begin to see patterns clearly. You recognize the cycles of idealization and devaluation. You see how their words and actions are designed to keep you hooked. That clarity comes only when you are not emotionally or practically dependent on them, and it makes you harder to manipulate. To a narcissist, someone who cannot be easily manipulated is dangerous. Your independence becomes a shield that they cannot easily penetrate, and that loss of access leaves them fearful and disarmed. Even socially, your independence is threatening. If you have relationships outside of their control, friendships and support systems that validate your reality, they lose their monopoly on your perception. They fear the influence of others who might affirm your independence and encourage you to stand firm in it. Isolation is a common tactic they use, cutting you off from external voices that might strengthen your autonomy. So when you maintain or rebuild connections outside of them, they feel exposed. Your independence, supported by a network beyond their reach, makes it harder for them to pull you back into dependency. At the root of this fear is the narcissist's fragile sense of self. They cannot conceive of relationships based on equality or mutual respect. For them, closeness requires dominance. If you are dependent, they cannot dominate because dominance depends on your need for them. Without your need, they are left facing their own inadequacy. It is easier for them to keep you dependent than to confront their inability to be truly equal partners, friends, or family members. Your self-sufficiency forces them to confront a truth they cannot handle. They are not necessary, and they are not as powerful as they claim. This is why they react so intensely when you assert your independence. They may accuse you of being selfish, cold, or disloyal. They may guilt you by saying you've changed or that you don't care about them anymore. They may even attempt to sabotage your progress, undermining your confidence, or creating obstacles to pull you back into dependence. All of these responses are rooted in fear. They fear the moment you realize you don't need them, because once that realization takes hold, their role in your life becomes optional, and to them, optional feels like annihilation. Narcissists fear your calm response instead of chaos because chaos is the environment where they thrive. They rely on provoking strong emotional reactions from you: anger, tears, frustration, desperation, because those reactions confirm that they have power over your inner world. When you erupt, when you defend yourself, when you try to explain endlessly or beg for understanding, they feed off that energy. It reassures them that they are significant enough to stir such intense feelings. But when you respond with calm, when you refuse to match their volatility, the dynamic changes completely. Calmness strips away their fuel. It leaves them grasping for control because without your chaos, they have nothing to work with. Narcissists are experts at pressing buttons. They know how to bring up past mistakes, how to twist your words, how to accuse you of things that cut deep. They do this to destabilize you, to make you react impulsively, and to steer the conversation in their favor. They want you flustered because in that state, you're less likely to stand firm, less likely to trust your own judgment. But when you remain calm, when you refuse to give them the outburst they're counting on, you hold on to your power. That calmness is terrifying to them because it means their usual tactics are failing. It shows them that their control over you is slipping, and that realization unsettles them deeply. Calmness also forces them to confront themselves, something they desperately avoid. When they launch into rage or manipulation and you stay grounded, the mirror reflects back their behavior more clearly. They can no longer deflect responsibility by pointing to your reaction because there is no reaction to blame. Narcissists often justify their cruelty by saying things like, "I only acted this way because you made me angry," or "Look at how crazy you're acting." But when you remain calm, that excuse evaporates. They are left exposed, standing in their own chaos without you to carry it for them. That exposure is frightening because it strips away the shield of blame they use to protect themselves. Another reason your calm terrifies them is because it signals detachment. Emotional chaos keeps you hooked in the cycle because it means you still care deeply about how they perceive you or how they treat you. If you are screaming, pleading, or crying, it shows them that they still occupy a central space in your mind. Calmness, on the other hand, suggests you are no longer emotionally entangled in the same way. It hints at indifference, and indifference to a narcissist feels like erasure. They would rather be hated than ignored because hate is still a form of engagement. Calmness threatens them with irrelevance, and irrelevance is their deepest fear. Calmness also represents self-control, and self-control is power. Narcissists thrive on controlling you by dictating your emotions. When they can make you react, they know they can steer the situation. But when you maintain your composure, you demonstrate that they no longer dictate your internal state. You show that you can choose your response, that you are not at the mercy of their words or behavior. That kind of strength is something they cannot tolerate because it reminds them that their dominance is an illusion. To them, your calmness is not just silence, it is defiance. It is a quiet refusal to let them dictate your reality. This is why they may escalate when you remain calm. If their insults or accusations don't work, they may become louder, crueler, more dramatic, trying to force a reaction out of you. They cannot stand the vacuum your calm creates because that vacuum reflects their lack of power. They may accuse you of being cold, unfeeling, or detached as a way of shaming you back into emotional chaos. They may provoke even harder, searching for a crack in your composure. These attempts reveal how desperate they are to shatter your calm, because your calmness represents their failure. Your calmness also breaks the cycle of reinforcement that fuels their behavior. Narcissists rely on patterns: provoke, watch you react, then use your reaction to justify their next move. This cycle keeps them in control, but when you interrupt the cycle with calmness, they lose the predictable rhythm they depend on. Suddenly, they cannot anticipate your next move. The unpredictability of your calm terrifies them because it means they no longer hold the script. They are forced into unfamiliar territory where their manipulations no longer guarantee results. On a deeper level, your calm reminds them of what they lack. Narcissists are often consumed by inner chaos, shame, insecurity, fear that they cover up with grandiosity and control. When they see you respond with serenity, it highlights the turbulence inside them. It forces them to recognize that you have cultivated something they cannot access. Genuine stability. That comparison is painful for them because it exposes the emptiness behind their performance of strength. Instead of feeling powerful, they feel small in the presence of your calm, and that shrinking terrifies them. Calmness also undermines one of their most insidious tools, gaslighting. Gaslighting depends on confusion, on making you doubt yourself and lose your footing. But calmness is rooted in clarity. When you are calm, you are better able to see the truth, to hold on to your perspective, and to refuse the distortions they try to feed you. This is why they try so hard to shake your composure, because as long as you remain calm, their lies cannot take root. They fear your calm not only for what it denies them, but for what it gives you. The ability to stay anchored in reality, untangled from their illusions. Your calmness also signals resilience. It shows that no matter how much they try to provoke you, you can endure without collapsing into the chaos they want. That resilience is threatening because it proves that you are stronger than they imagined. They fear strength in any form, but calm strength is the most frightening of all because it is quiet, steady, and unshakable. It cannot be shouted down, manipulated, or dismissed. It stands as living proof that you are no longer under their spell, and that realization is one they cannot bear. Narcissists fear boundaries that expose their limits because boundaries are the one thing that reveal, without question, that they are not in full control of you. Boundaries mean you have drawn a line, a clear separation between what you will accept and what you will not, between what belongs to you and what they cannot cross. For someone who thrives on intrusion, domination, and erasing the individuality of others, boundaries feel like a wall shutting them out. To a narcissist, every boundary you set is a declaration that their influence is not absolute, and that reality terrifies them. Boundaries expose their limits because narcissists live in a world where they believe they are entitled to unrestricted access. They want your time, your energy, your attention, your emotions, and sometimes even your resources. They feel entitled to all of it as if your life exists to feed their needs. When you establish a boundary, whether it's as simple as saying no, choosing to take time for yourself, or refusing to tolerate disrespect, you challenge that sense of entitlement. They are confronted with the reality that you are a separate individual with your own needs, and that separation threatens their illusion of control. They fear boundaries because boundaries highlight equality, something they resist at all costs. In their minds, relationships are hierarchies where they must always be at the top. Boundaries interrupt that dynamic because boundaries say you don't get to decide everything. I have a say here too. That equal footing is unacceptable to them. They cannot stand the idea of being on the same level as someone else because it undermines their superiority. Boundaries remind them that they cannot occupy every space, dictate every outcome, or rewrite every rule. It is a reminder that they are not omnipotent, and that realization is deeply unsettling. Another reason they fear boundaries is that boundaries cut off their supply. A narcissist depends on the emotional reactions and attention of others to sustain themselves. They provoke, manipulate, charm, or guilt you into giving them that supply. When you set a boundary, you cut off easy access to that energy. For example, refusing to engage in endless arguments denies them the drama they crave. Saying no to unreasonable demands denies them the satisfaction of controlling you. Limiting your availability denies them the ability to intrude at will. Each boundary denies them something they believe they are entitled to, and each denial feels like rejection. That rejection cuts into their fragile ego, fueling the fear that they are losing their grip on you. Boundaries also expose their tactics. Many of their manipulations work best in a space without clear rules where everything is blurry and they can twist situations to their advantage. But a boundary brings clarity. It defines the line that they cannot cross, and when they attempt to cross it anyway, their behavior becomes obvious. The moment you say, "I won't tolerate being spoken to that way," and they try to do it again, their disrespect is unmistakable. The moment you say, "I need time to myself," and they intrude, it becomes clear they have no regard for your needs. Boundaries shine a light on the very qualities they try to hide. They reveal the lack of respect, the entitlement, the disregard for others, and that exposure is terrifying to them because it makes their true nature harder to disguise. Narcissists also fear boundaries because boundaries shift power back to you. When you set a boundary and enforce it, you demonstrate that you are in control of yourself. They may not like it, they may push against it, but your ability to hold firm proves that you are not easily manipulated. To them, that power is threatening because it means you are no longer fully under their influence. They fear the independence that boundaries represent because every boundary says, "I own myself, not you." That ownership of self challenges the dynamic they rely on where they dictate and you comply. This fear often shows up in the way they react to boundaries. Some will become enraged, accusing you of being selfish, cold, or ungrateful. Others will guilt trip you, saying things like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me." Still others may try to undermine your boundary with charm, acting overly sweet or apologetic to get you to lower your guard. All of these reactions are designed to dismantle your boundary because your boundary represents their loss of power. The more intensely they react, the clearer it becomes that the boundary has struck a nerve. Boundaries also terrify them because they create consequences. Narcissists prefer relationships where they can act however they please without facing repercussions. But a boundary says, if you do this, here is what will happen. For example, if you yell at me, I will leave the room. Or if you insult me, I will not respond. Boundaries attach actions to outcomes, and that accountability is something they avoid at all costs. They fear being held to any standard other than the ones they set, because standards reveal their inability to meet them. Boundaries introduce accountability into a space where they want none, and that accountability exposes their limitations. Another layer to this fear is that boundaries threaten abandonment. For narcissists, abandonment is one of their deepest unspoken fears. A firm boundary consistently enforced carries the potential to end the relationship if they refuse to respect it. And because many narcissists assume that others will never truly walk away, the threat of losing you becomes very real the moment you start enforcing boundaries. They fear that your boundary is the beginning of your freedom, a step toward independence that may ultimately mean you will no longer tolerate them at all. Even small boundaries can trigger this fear, declining a phone call, not responding to a text immediately, or choosing not to share certain details of your life. I'll send a message you are not fully available to them at all times. These small acts of self-protection remind them that they do not own you. They remind them that you can withhold access and that withholding feels like rejection. To them, rejection is intolerable because it punctures the inflated image they hold of themselves as all important. Ultimately, boundaries reveal the truth they try to deny. They do not have unlimited power over you. Each time you hold firm, you chip away at the illusion that they are in control. They fear boundaries because boundaries expose reality, and reality is the one thing they cannot fully bend to their will. Narcissists fear your refusal to seek their validation because validation is the lifeblood that sustains their fragile sense of self. Everything about the way they operate is designed to keep you looking to them for approval, for affirmation, for recognition. They want you to feel uncertain without their praise, to doubt yourself unless they confirm your worth, to hesitate before making decisions unless they sign off on them. The moment you stop seeking that validation, the moment you realize you can stand in your own truth without needing their nod, they are thrown into panic. It strips them of the role they've assigned themselves as the ultimate judge of your value, and it forces them to confront the terrifying idea that you no longer need them in the way they need you. Validation is one of the main tools narcissists use to keep people hooked. At first, they often flood you with it, showering you with compliments, admiration, and affirmation. This is not because they truly see your worth, but because they know how intoxicating that attention feels. They build a system where your self-esteem becomes tied to their approval. When you've grown accustomed to being validated by them, their sudden withdrawal of that praise leaves you craving it even more. This cycle keeps you engaged, always striving to earn back their affirmation. But when you break free from that cycle, when you decide that your worth is not dependent on their fluctuating approval, they lose the leverage they hold over you. That is what terrifies them, the realization that their approval no longer has the power to control you. They fear this refusal because it means they are no longer the center of your decision-making process. Narcissists expect to be the sun around which everyone else revolves. They want to be consulted, admired, and depended on before you take action in your life. Your independence in choosing for yourself threatens that role. When you act without seeking their validation, you demonstrate that their opinion is not essential. You show them that you can move forward with confidence regardless of what they think. To them, that feels like a profound loss of significance because it erases the illusion that your life depends on their guidance. Another reason they fear your refusal to seek their validation is that it exposes the instability of their own self-esteem. Narcissists project an image of supreme confidence, but beneath that mask lies deep insecurity. They rely on others to mirror back the image they want to believe about themselves. When you stop seeking their validation, you are no longer feeding into that system. Your refusal denies them the mirror they use to inflate their ego. Without that reflection, they are left to confront the emptiness they spend their lives avoiding. In this way, your self-sufficiency becomes a mirror of its own, one that reflects their fragility instead of their grandeur, and that reflection fills them with fear. They also fear this refusal because it removes their ability to control your emotions. As long as you depend on their validation, they can use it as a weapon. They can withhold it to make you feel insecure, then grant it again to make you feel relieved and grateful. This push and pull dynamic gives them immense control, but once you stop depending on their approval, the weapon loses its edge. They can withhold all they want, but it no longer destabilizes you. They can insult or criticize, but your sense of worth remains intact. To them, this feels like losing one of their most reliable strategies. Your refusal to seek validation disarms them, leaving them without a tool they've always depended on to maintain dominance. This is why they often react so strongly when you stop seeking their approval. They may accuse you of being arrogant, selfish, or disrespectful. They may try to undermine your confidence with subtle jabs, hoping to push you back into self-doubt so you'll start chasing their validation again. They may even attempt to reel you back in with sudden praise, testing if the hook still works. All of these tactics are driven by fear, the fear that they are no longer the authority you once believed them to be. The refusal to seek validation also symbolizes growth, and growth is something narcissists fear in others. They prefer relationships where people stay small, dependent, and easy to manipulate. When you grow into self-assurance, when you cultivate confidence that does not require their input, you outgrow the role they assign to you. You step out of the box they put you in, and that challenges their sense of superiority. They fear the strength that comes from someone who validates themselves, because self-validated people are harder to control, harder to deceive, and harder to keep tethered. Your refusal to seek validation also sends a clear message. You see through their game. You recognize that their praise and criticism are not accurate reflections of your worth, but tools of manipulation. Once you understand this, their power weakens. They fear people who see clearly because clarity breaks the spell. When you stop asking, "Do you think I did the right thing?" Or "Do you still love me?" Or "Am I good enough for you?" you take back the authority they were trying to hold over you. That reclamation of authority terrifies them, because it proves that their approval is optional, not essential. Even in small ways, your refusal to seek validation unsettles them. Not asking for their opinion before making a decision, not reacting with desperation when they withhold praise, not lighting up only when they offer a compliment. All of these moments chip away at the narrative they've built about their importance. They notice when you don't flinch at their disapproval. They notice when you carry on confidently despite their silence. Each instance signals that you are building a life where they are not the ultimate judge, and each instance feeds their fear of irrelevance. At its core, their fear is not just about losing control over you, but about losing the illusion of themselves. As long as you seek their validation, they can pretend they are powerful, wise, indispensable. When you refuse, you reveal the truth. They are not the source of your worth, and they never were. This revelation strips away the mask they work so hard to maintain. That is why your refusal terrifies them. It denies them the role they crave, exposes the weakness they hide, and reminds them of the strength they cannot take from you. Narcissists fear the collapse of their carefully crafted image because that image is the very thing they depend on to survive in the world. Unlike people who are comfortable with authenticity, narcissists build their lives on performance. They create a persona that hides their vulnerabilities, insecurities, and flaws, presenting instead a version of themselves they want others to admire, fear, or envy. This image is everything to them. It is their armor, their camouflage, and their greatest weapon. But because it is not real, it is also fragile, and any crack in it threatens to expose the truth they cannot bear to face. That fear of collapse drives much of their behavior, and it explains why they fight so hard to maintain control over how they are seen. The image they create often looks different depending on the audience. To colleagues, they may present themselves as the hardworking, charismatic leader. To friends, they may appear generous, charming, and socially magnetic. To a partner or family member, they might craft an image of being selfless, devoted, or misunderstood. Behind closed doors, however, the truth is very different. When the mask slips, the arrogance, entitlement, and manipulation come through. The fear lies in the possibility that someone will begin to connect the dots, noticing that the public image does not match the private reality. If too many cracks appear, the carefully constructed facade begins to crumble, and that collapse feels catastrophic to them. They fear this collapse because it would expose the very insecurities they spend their lives trying to conceal. The grandiosity, the arrogance, the superiority, all of it is a smokescreen designed to hide feelings of inadequacy and shame. If the image falls apart, they risk being seen as ordinary, flawed, or weak. To most people, being seen as human is not a threat, but to a narcissist, it feels like annihilation. Their sense of identity is so entangled with the false self they project that the collapse of the image feels like the collapse of their very existence. The collapse of the image is also terrifying to them because it strips away their power over others. Narcissists use their crafted persona to gain admiration, trust, and influence. It is how they draw people in and how they maintain control. If the image breaks, others begin to question their intentions, their integrity, and their authenticity. They may lose the admiration they crave, the trust they exploit, or the loyalty they manipulate. Without the mask, they risk being exposed not as the hero, the genius, or the victim they claim to be, but as someone who deceives and exploits. That exposure threatens the foundation of the relationships they've built and leaves them vulnerable to rejection or abandonment. They also fear the collapse because it removes their ability to rewrite reality. Narcissists depend on controlling the narrative. As long as the image holds, they can manipulate how others perceive them, spinning stories to protect their ego. When the image collapses, their ability to dictate the narrative falters. People begin to see the contradictions, the patterns of behavior, the lies. This loss of narrative control is deeply frightening because it means the truth has room to emerge. They are left defenseless against facts, against witnesses, against reality itself, and that confrontation is something they work tirelessly to avoid. This is why they often react so strongly when they sense their image is threatened. If someone questions their integrity, they may lash out with rage. If someone points out an inconsistency, they may deflect with charm or lies. If someone challenges their story, they may smear that person's reputation to shift the attention away from themselves. These reactions are not random, they are survival strategies. To them, every challenge to the image feels like an attack on their very being, so they respond with whatever weapons they have to protect it. Their intensity is rooted in fear, the fear that one challenge could create a domino effect that brings the entire facade crashing down. They also fear collapse because once an image falls, it is nearly impossible to rebuild it in the same way. Trust once broken cannot be restored to its original state. Admiration once lost is difficult to regain. Narcissists know this, even if only unconsciously. The collapse of the image represents a permanent scar on the persona they have worked so hard to create. It means the illusion is no longer airtight, and that vulnerability makes them feel exposed in ways they cannot tolerate. They may attempt to reinvent themselves with a new image, but the underlying fear remains that someone will always see through them again. The collapse of the image also undermines their ability to recruit new sources of validation. Narcissists constantly seek new people to admire and affirm them, but if their reputation is tarnished, their pool of potential admirers shrinks. They fear gossip, exposure, or public humiliation for this reason. If too many people know the truth, their ability to charm new sources becomes limited. The fear of social rejection or public shame weighs heavily on them, even if they never admit it. This is why many narcissists go to great lengths to maintain appearances, from curating their social media to exaggerating accomplishments to fabricating stories that keep the illusion alive. On a deeper level, the collapse of their image forces them closer to the core truth they are running from, the recognition that the image was never real. This confrontation with reality is what terrifies them most. The image is a shield against their internal emptiness, the shame and insecurity buried beneath the grandiosity. If the shield shatters, they are left vulnerable to their own reflection. They must face the dissonance between who they pretend to be and who they actually are, and that confrontation is unbearable. It threatens to unravel the fragile psychological defenses that hold their identity together. Even small cracks in the image can trigger this fear. A friend noticing they exaggerated a story, a colleague questioning their authority, a partner pointing out their contradictions. All of these moments are reminders that the image is not invincible. Each challenge chips away at the illusion, and they live with the constant fear that one day the mask will not hold. This ever-present anxiety drives their obsession with control, perfection, and appearances. They monitor others closely, always alert to signs that their image might be in danger because they know that collapse is their greatest vulnerability. Narcissists fear your ability to walk away without guilt because it is the ultimate demonstration that you are no longer under their control. Their entire strategy in relationships is built around keeping you tied to them through obligation, manipulation, fear, or the constant need for their approval. They depend on the idea that you will always hesitate, always second-guess yourself, always feel guilty if you even think of leaving. That guilt is their invisible chain, and they pull it every time they sense you might distance yourself. But when you learn to walk away freely, without apology or remorse, you shatter one of their most reliable tools. You reveal that they no longer hold the emotional strings they counted on, and that loss terrifies them. Guilt is one of the primary weapons a narcissist uses to maintain control. They frame themselves as victims, making you feel as though leaving them would be cruel, selfish, or heartless. They remind you of the times they helped you, even if their help came with strings attached. They exaggerate their sacrifices, real or imagined, to convince you that you owe them your loyalty. They highlight your mistakes, flaws, or failures to keep you feeling unworthy of independence. Every tactic is designed to create hesitation in your mind so that the thought of walking away feels unbearable. As long as guilt binds you, they feel safe. But when guilt no longer works, when you can leave without carrying the weight of obligation, their safety net vanishes. They fear this because it removes their ability to draw you back in. Many people who leave narcissists often return because of guilt. A narcissist knows this. They count on the idea that you will remember their moments of charm, their promises, or the way they position themselves as essential in your life. They know that guilt can disguise itself as compassion, as responsibility, as loyalty. But when you step away without guilt, you close the door firmly. You send a message that you recognize the manipulation for what it is and that you refuse to be bound by it. That finality terrifies them because it means you are beyond their reach. Your ability to walk away without guilt also signals that you see through their illusions. Guilt thrives when you believe their distorted narratives, when you accept their version of events, where they are the victim and you are the one who has done wrong. But walking away freely shows that you have reclaimed your own perspective. You no longer buy into the stories they spin. You no longer internalize the blame they try to place on you. This clarity is threatening because it proves that their gaslighting has lost its hold. They cannot twist your reality anymore, and without that distortion, their ability to manipulate collapses. Another reason they fear this ability is because it reflects your independence. Walking away guilt-free means you trust yourself enough to make choices for your own well-being. It shows that you no longer need their approval to validate your decisions. It shows that you prioritize your peace over their chaos. That independence is something they cannot tolerate because it contradicts the role they see themselves playing in your life. They want to be the anchor you cannot drift from, the gravitational pull that always brings you back. When you sever that tie without regret, you dismantle the illusion of indispensability they work so hard to maintain. Your lack of guilt also strips them of the drama they crave. Narcissists thrive on emotional entanglement. Even if you try to leave, they want the exit to be filled with tears, apologies, and painful goodbyes. They want you to linger in the doorway, conflicted, uncertain, and still tethered to them emotionally. But when you walk away calmly, without emotional theatrics, you deny them the performance they feed on. You show that they no longer have the power to dictate the tone of your story. That silence, that absence of drama, is far more threatening to them than anger or grief. To them, indifference is the greatest insult, and your guilt-free departure embodies that indifference. They also fear what your departure represents to others. Narcissists are invested in appearances. They want the world to see them as the desirable partner, the devoted friend, the respected leader. When you walk away without guilt, you disrupt that narrative. It raises questions. Why would someone leave so confidently if the narcissist were truly as admirable as they claim? Your departure without hesitation hints at a truth they desperately want to hide. That behind the mask lies toxicity, manipulation, and control. The possibility that others might begin to see what you saw fills them with dread. This is why, when they sense you're capable of leaving guilt-free, they may escalate their tactics. They might try love bombing, showering you with affection and promises to lure you back. They might unleash rage, hurling accusations to make you doubt yourself. They might attempt to smear your name, painting you as cold, heartless, or disloyal to others. Every reaction is designed to reintroduce guilt, to make you question whether walking away is justified. Their desperation reveals how much they fear the power you hold when you can leave without looking back. Your ability to walk away also reminds them of their deepest fear, abandonment. Beneath their arrogance lies a terror of being left, a terror rooted in the fragility of their identity. They depend on others to prop up their sense of self. When you walk away freely, you become living proof that they are not as indispensable as they want to believe. You show them that people can leave, survive, and even thrive without them. That reality cuts into the core of their insecurity. It confronts them with the possibility that others may follow your example, that they may lose not just you, but anyone who recognizes the same patterns. Even subtle expressions of this ability unsettle them. Not answering their call immediately, declining an invitation without excuse, or showing no visible regret when distancing yourself. All of these small acts of boundary and self-assurance hint at your capacity to leave without guilt. They sense it and they react because each act signals that the leash of obligation is weakening. The more they sense your freedom, the greater their fear becomes, because they know that once you fully embrace that power, their hold over you is gone forever. Narcissists fear truth and clarity over manipulation because these are the very forces that unravel the intricate webs they weave. Their survival in relationships depends on distortion, confusion, and the ability to bend reality to their advantage. They thrive when people doubt themselves, when they question their own memories, and when they surrender their trust to the narcissist's version of events. Truth is dangerous to them because it cuts through the fog they work so hard to create. Clarity is threatening because it leaves no room for their games. Where there is truth, manipulation cannot flourish, and that reality terrifies them. The narcissist's entire strategy is built on controlling perception. They exaggerate, twist, or outright lie about circumstances to maintain a position of power. They may gaslight you into doubting your experiences, making you question whether what you saw or felt was real. They may shift blame when confronted, using half-truths or distractions to keep the focus off themselves. In this way, they build a world where their version of events dominates and where others feel compelled to defer to them. Truth, however, has the power to puncture that world instantly. It reveals contradictions. It exposes hidden motives. It dismantles carefully crafted lies. That exposure is what they fear most because it leaves them vulnerable to being seen in their raw, unguarded form. Clarity is equally threatening because it strips away the ambiguity they rely on. Narcissists flourish in environments where people are confused, unsure, and constantly question what is real. If you are unclear, you are easier to manipulate. They can redirect conversations, deflect responsibility, and plant seeds of doubt in your mind. But when you develop clarity about who they are, about what has happened, and about what you deserve, their tactics fall flat. You no longer waste time decoding mixed signals or second-guessing your instincts. Instead, you see patterns for what they are. That level of discernment weakens their influence and puts you back in control, which is precisely why they fear it. Truth and clarity also eliminate the emotional leverage they depend on. Narcissists often manipulate through guilt, fear, or obligation. They want you to feel responsible for their moods, accountable for their happiness, and guilty if you assert your independence. But once you see the truth, that their emotions are not your responsibility, that their happiness does not depend on your compliance, that their suffering is often exaggerated to keep you bound, you strip them of the leverage they hold. With clarity, you stop accepting blame that isn't yours. You stop reacting to their provocations. You stop engaging in cycles designed to wear you down. This freedom terrifies them because it shows that you are no longer a pawn in their game. They also fear truth because it has the power to spread. One person seeing through their manipulation is dangerous enough, but when the truth becomes visible to others, the narcissist's entire foundation is at risk. Their image, which they guard so carefully, depends on the ignorance of others. If clarity spreads, if people compare notes, share experiences, or recognize the same patterns, the narcissist can no longer control the narrative. Their lies unravel in public, their reputation suffers, and their ability to recruit new admirers diminishes. This potential for exposure creates deep paranoia, leading them to work obsessively to control what others know, who others talk to, and how information is shared. Another reason truth and clarity unsettle them is that these forces demand accountability. As long as confusion reigns, they can avoid responsibility. They can shift the blame, deny, minimize, or distract. But truth corners them. When the facts are undeniable, when clarity removes the distortions, they are forced into a position they despise: accountability. To them, accountability feels like weakness. Because it requires admitting fault and relinquishing control, they will fight it fiercely because the moment they are held accountable, their grandiosity is punctured and the mask begins to crack. Clarity also strengthens your boundaries, and boundaries are something narcissists loathe. When you are confused, you may hesitate to enforce limits, unsure if you are being too harsh or unfair. But when you see the truth clearly, boundaries become non-negotiable. You recognize where manipulation begins and you stop tolerating it. You recognize when your needs are being dismissed and you assert them firmly. This terrifies them because boundaries disrupt their access to your energy, time, and attention. Clarity fuels those boundaries, making them stronger and harder to dismantle. They fear truth on an even deeper level because it exposes them not only to others but to themselves. Most narcissists go to great lengths to avoid self-reflection. They defend themselves against uncomfortable realities with denial, projection, or blame shifting, but truth has a way of piercing even their internal defenses. When their lies are contradicted, when patterns are undeniable, when evidence mounts, they are forced closer to an inner confrontation they cannot bear. That confrontation threatens the fragile identity they have built on illusions of superiority and control. In this way, truth feels like a direct assault on their very sense of self. Even small doses of clarity are enough to unsettle them. A simple question that points out an inconsistency, a calm statement of fact, or a refusal to accept their distorted version of events. All of these can rattle them. They may react with rage, denial, or sudden charm to reassert control. Their intensity in those moments reflects the depth of their fear. They know that if truth takes hold, their manipulation will no longer be effective. It is not just the exposure they fear, but the permanence of it. Once someone sees clearly, it is nearly impossible to unsee. This fear explains why narcissists often go to such extremes to maintain control of the narrative. They isolate people to prevent them from comparing experiences. They flood you with words to overwhelm your ability to think critically. They create smokescreens of drama to distract from the core issue. Every tactic is an attempt to cloud truth and blur clarity. Their energy is devoted to maintaining confusion because confusion keeps you tethered, but truth is always stronger, and clarity always steadies the ground beneath your feet. Narcissists fear your strength to no longer play their game because their entire sense of control rests on the assumption that you will always engage. They set traps with their words, their moods, and their actions, waiting for you to respond with confusion, anger, defensiveness, or compliance. Every argument they provoke, every guilt trip they launch, every moment of chaos they create is part of a carefully designed game where they set the rules and expect you to play along. When you no longer react, when you refuse to participate in the endless cycles of manipulation, you disrupt the very structure that keeps them feeling powerful. Your strength to stand outside of their game makes them powerless, and that is what they fear most. Their games thrive on emotional investment. As long as you are explaining yourself, defending your choices, or trying to win their approval, they know they still hold your attention. They may push your buttons deliberately just to confirm that they can still get a reaction from you. They may stonewall lie or twist your words to pull you into a spiral of frustration. Each reaction you give them is fuel, proof that you are still entangled in their web. But when you stop playing, when you meet provocation with silence, manipulation with clarity, and guilt trips with indifference, they feel the emptiness of their own tactics. Without your participation, their strategies collapse into nothing. Narcissists also fear this strength because it reflects a shift in power. The game is designed so that they are always in the dominant position, directing the narrative while you scramble to keep up. They rely on your compliance with unspoken rules. Don't challenge their version of reality. Don't assert your needs too strongly. Don't expose the manipulation. But when you no longer accept those rules, the power dynamic reverses. You stop dancing to their rhythm, and instead you create your own. This shift terrifies them because it reveals the truth they work so hard to deny, that their control was never real, only borrowed from your willingness to play. The strength to stop playing also removes the drama they crave. Narcissists feed on intensity, whether positive or negative. They want emotional highs through admiration, but they are just as satisfied with emotional lows through conflict. The common thread is that they remain the center of your focus. When you no longer engage, the drama fades. Your calm detachment leaves them without fuel, without the sparks that make them feel significant. To them, this indifference is worse than anger, because anger still means you are involved. Calm withdrawal, however, communicates that they no longer matter, and that is intolerable for someone who needs constant validation to maintain their sense of self. Another reason they fear this strength is because it reflects your growth. Choosing not to play their game requires awareness, discipline, and emotional resilience. It means you have seen through their tactics and chosen not to be controlled by them. It means you have built enough confidence to trust your truth without needing their acknowledgement. This kind of growth is dangerous to a narcissist because it signals that you are moving beyond their influence. Growth implies independence, and independence is the one thing they cannot exploit. Your evolution leaves them behind, exposing their inability to keep you tethered. They also fear the permanence of this shift. In their minds, games can always be restarted. Even if you walk away, they assume they can pull you back with charm, guilt, or intimidation. But once you have truly stopped playing, you are no longer susceptible to those tactics. You see them for what they are, and that clarity creates a wall they cannot break through. This permanence terrifies them because it means their usual cycle of discard and hoovering, the push and pull they depend on, will no longer work. They are left with no moves to make, no strategies to fall back on. Your refusal to play also challenges their identity. Narcissists build their sense of self on domination, superiority, and the ability to control others. When you step outside the game, you deny them that validation. They can no longer measure their worth by how effectively they can manipulate you. This leaves them facing a void within themselves, a void they desperately try to avoid. The absence of your participation confronts them with their own emptiness, which is why they react so strongly when you detach. Their anger, their desperation, their sudden bursts of charm are all attempts to pull you back into the arena where they feel safe. They fear this strength because it is contagious. When others see you refusing to engage, when they witness your calm boundaries and your refusal to be baited, it disrupts the narcissist's influence on a larger scale. Their game only works if everyone around them continues to play. But one person's refusal can spark questions in others. Why aren't they reacting? Why aren't they apologizing? Why aren't they afraid? Your behavior exposes the possibility that the narcissist is not as powerful as they pretend to be. This ripple effect threatens the image they project to the world, which is why they work so hard to silence or discredit anyone who refuses to play. Even small demonstrations of this strength unsettle them. Ignoring a baiting comment, calmly walking away from an argument, or refusing to justify yourself when accused, these small acts of resistance communicate that you see the game clearly and will not be drawn in. Each time you resist, their fear grows because it shows that their grip on you is slipping. They may escalate, switching between rage and affection, between threats and promises, but every failed attempt only deepens their anxiety. They sense that their time is running out, that their hold on you is weakening beyond repair. At its core, their fear comes from the realization that without the game, they have nothing left. The manipulation, the control, the drama, these are the tools they depend on to feel significant and to maintain relationships on their terms. If you refuse to engage, they cannot win, because winning requires a willing opponent. Your strength to step outside the game denies them the validation they crave and exposes the fragility of their entire strategy. To them, that strength is not just resistance, it is a revelation that they were never as powerful as they believed.